I've been with Netflix just under 5 years, and my responsibility is oversight of legal hiring at Netflix, primarily for the United States. Just on a personal note, my name probably gave away that I'm of Iranian descent. So while I was born in the United States, my parents are Iranian. I did live in Iran for a couple of years as a toddler and speak Farsi not very well, but call myself bilingual. So with that, I would love to turn it over to Neda for a quick introduction before we jump into the content.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you, Payman. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm especially grateful for this opportunity to provide, some level of perspective of building relationships online. As Nikki mentioned, it has been, quite the past 24 hours for everyone. So hoping that this might be a nice little break and distraction. As Nikki mentioned, we are here from Netflix. I work as a rights analyst, and what that basically is, we work with distribution rights. So when a contract and agreement is executed, we as rights analysts read through the contract and pull out all of the ownership rights or the licensing rights. So where can we distribute the project, the show or the film, and what languages can we subtitle and dub it in? Do we have sub-licensing rights? All those technicalities we pull from the contract and enter in a database, and it creates what are called windows for downstream teams to do their work against. And as far as my background goes, I'm also of Iranian descent. I was born in Tehran when I was I was born there and moved here to the States when I was about 5 years old. So have lived here most of my life and have been back to see family several times, and love that, we all kind of come from that same background and can share that and can share that commonality with one another. And without further ado, I'll pass it to Nikki so we could get the presentation started.
Great. And just brief housekeeping. I think that if we were able to do this in person, I would have loved to get to know folks in the room a little bit. I think a virtual environment makes that a little bit challenging. But that being said, by all means, please use the chat box and ask us questions. We plan to talk for probably about 20-25 minutes and then leave plenty of time for questions. But if there is something that you'd like to ask us, again, please use the chat box or speak up. So we'd love for this to be really as interactive and as useful as possible. Again, given it's our sort of first collaboration, we've endeavored to cover topics that we think you'll find of interest, but happy to sort of go in what direction may be the most useful. We are talking tonight about building relationships online, and Neda and I thought that it might be useful to talk a little bit in the big picture about how companies go about hiring talent, because building relationships is oftentimes with either the short or long-term goal with perhaps gaining employment down the line. And given that that's sort of my area of expertise at Netflix, and Neda definitely has a perspective on this as well, we thought it might be useful to start there and speak about, again, building relationships with a lens of gaining employment or building relationships that sort of lend to career trajectory or career path over time. So if you don't mind going to the first slide, I think whoever's controlling the slides, which is not me. Thanks. Sorry, one back. Awesome. As you probably know, sorry, I'm going to try to. I have a 3-year-old, so I had to sort of arrange to be in a private place away from him. So this is not usually where I work. So just getting used to the environment. So with respect to how companies hire, obviously the perspective I'm going to give you today is a little bit focused on Netflix, given that that's where I am, but I've recruited at other companies before my time at Netflix. So I want to lend you, that experience as well. And generally speaking, as companies look for talent or identify talent in in various ways. And again, some of that identification of talent may be for either short-term purposes or long-term purposes. And I'll kind of talk about what that means. But when a company has an immediate hiring need, the most typical way that companies hire is to post a job and hope that they have great, applications coming in. At companies that have more resources than that, there are people like myself who are sort of more proactively identifying talent, either for current open roles or doing things like this, sort of building relationships with the community and with potential talent so that we kind of know where to start when we do have an open role. So while I do want to assure you that when you're pursuing employment at Netflix or in other places, when you do put in an application, most places do take the time to go through those applications and identify talent in that fashion. But oftentimes there is, again, sort of a more proactive element on the part of in-house recruitment departments. And we're going to talk a lot about LinkedIn as a resource for making sure that when people like myself are looking for people like you, how to sort of put your best foot forward. So I'll kind of leave that for Neda to cover. We, in terms of looking, again, sort of, proactively for great talent at the organization, we may use a lot of online tools to do that, like a LinkedIn or doing, internet research. And looking for people who, might have a website where they're coding, and that's, for a technical role, really interesting for us. Or it might be that we're looking for names of individuals who have been to conferences where we think they're, there's, a skill set that's going to be interesting to us. But the other thing that we're doing is we are also building relationships, right? So we are trying to take the time to get to know organizations like PARS Equality Center or other, affinity type organizations like organizations of engineers or legal organizations are something that I, work with quite a lot, the Iranian American Bar Association. It's important for us to have relationships with those types of organizations so that we can talk a little bit about, what it's like to work at Netflix, what's important to us, help people understand the types of jobs that we hire for, and likewise, just meet people, right? And that could be, again, for the purpose of filling roles short term, or it could be for just building relationships for the future. So again, we try as a recruitment organization to think about hiring as a long-term relationship. And we're going to again talk about how on the other side of that, it's also a long-term relationship, but kind of just wanted to explain what's important to us. And in the spirit of talking a little bit too about what is important at Netflix, one of the reasons that we do take the time to develop relationships with external organizations and that we do take the time to proactively sort of make sure we understand the talent pool is because at Netflix, it's very important for us to hire from a diverse talent pool. Right. So our goal at Netflix, if you're currently a subscriber of our service, is to make sure that we're bringing joy to our members through great entertainment. But we also would like to really entertain the world. And in order to be able to, or the subscribers we don't have yet, right, around the world. And in order to do that, it's pretty important that the hiring that we do is, again, drawing in diverse perspectives and is really a reflection of the folks that we intend to attract. Again, a little bit of an insight into what goes into sort of the hiring process, and with the acknowledgement that building relationships, particularly in our current world, is often through online mechanisms and is through great resources like LinkedIn. I'd love to hand it over to Neda to talk a little bit about best practices on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Nikki. Yes, so as far as best practices for LinkedIn go, you'll see a few bullet points called out, but just to emphasize a few of these factors, specifically starting with high resolution photo. This might seem like a minuscule point, but it can be quite important, especially if the relationship is being initiated online. It allows the, what I can imagine in the recruiter's position with the potential candidate to gain a sense of familiarity of who this individual looks like and their sense of personality, just to kind of get an overall energy or a vibe. And also specifically speaking of this high resolution photo, it can be relatively easy nowadays, given that smartphones have this functionality quite easily, especially with the portrait mode that is available. It might be as simple as asking a friend or a family member to snap a few photos of you. Solo pic, like basically just a picture of you would be best, especially maybe torso up, just so they can, really kind of see who they're engaging with. Definitely no one else in the photo. It's not necessarily a big deal, but just kind of letting you know of the best practices here and what can be perceived as semi-professional attire, business casual, maybe not a loud logo on a t-shirt, but a t-shirt I imagine would be fine. Maybe not a solo pic of you like at a bar or a club. It doesn't have to be like specifically professional, like against a back, like a white wall or a blue wall. It can be, out in nature or anything like that. But to kind of show a little bit about who you are in that one picture. The other point I wanted to emphasize here is using bold and direct language. So in other words, using keywords, specifically industry-related keywords. For example, in the accounting field, accounting and finance is my background. And when I was updating my LinkedIn page, I made sure to use keywords like Big Four and the company that I worked with, PwC, and other keywords like Gap and SOX, like Sarbanes-Oxley, industry-related language that when a recruiter comes along this page, they can see that you're well-versed and you have a familiarity with the work, and that your skill set will go to prove that. And the bold and direct language is also very helpful, since I imagine recruiters are seeing several LinkedIn pages through the day. And so I imagine they're probably spending 30 seconds or less pulling away key points from that page. And so using the industry-related keywords, I imagine will be most helpful here. And also with that, spelling and grammar check, especially with accessibility with the internet and Google, especially Google Docs. It's a great resource to provide you immediate feedback, especially when it comes to grammar. I imagine, individuals in like middle school and high school now, and how they go about, drafting their papers and all the help that they can get from these online resources. So use the internet and these Google Docs to really draft your description of your work experience and your profile paragraph as best as you can. And speaking of specifically the about section of your LinkedIn page, this, is your, I wouldn't say playground, but this is kind of where you can get creative with what you really want the recruiters to learn about you. And you can see examples online. I remember looking at several. Some of them were very quirky and fun, and some of them were very serious and professional. It depends on the line of work that you're interested in. I can imagine if it's something like accounting or legal, it may be a little bit more direct usage of language, but if it's more something in the arts and creative, it may be a little bit more quirky. But that's not to say you can't be quirky, in a legal or finance professional setting. But there is a fine line, a balance there to maneuver. And also to that point about the about section, you'll notice in LinkedIn, there's that availability of a headline, a professional headline. And you can draft this for yourself, or LinkedIn automatically creates it for you, depending on the current role and job that you have. So for example, if you were to Google my name, like Neda Ghafourian LinkedIn, on Google, what you'll see pop up is my name, Neda Ghafourian, rights analyst, Netflix. That's the professional headline that LinkedIn auto-generated for me. You can edit that for yourself as well. It would, it also, like if you have a master's or a special certification in something that you want to call out, or let's say if you're a PhD candidate and you want to use that in your professional headline, it's highly, highly encouraged. Let's see here. The other last couple of points is definitely make sure your information is up to date as possible. I can imagine, you know, it's not necessary to like write massive paragraphs under the work experience. As I mentioned, recruiters are probably spending 30 seconds to a minute at the most per page. So I wouldn't go into a whole novel. It's not like a cover letter, a cover letter, I should say, but it's more like snapshots of your work experience and skill set. There's also this functionality in LinkedIn that is under the, let's see, I just had to Google this to remember, but it's under the settings and privacy in LinkedIn. If you go to click the top right icon picture of your LinkedIn and you go to privacy settings and you go to job preferences, there's a toggle that you can turn it on that says, let recruiters know I'm looking. This might seem pretty, you know, minuscule and not important, but I will let you know that this is how Netflix found me. I had updated my LinkedIn, used those keywords, I used a good photo, updated my work experience to be, you know, the most recent, and turned that toggle on. And I was actively searching, applying to jobs, and I forgot to turn that toggle off. And I had stopped my search for a little bit, realizing that, you know, I'll just stay in this current role that I have for a little while and then kick back up the search after one of our major deadlines. And then one day I checked my LinkedIn and I saw a direct email from a Netflix recruiter that said, Netflix and Neda. And I was like, what is this? I clicked it and they said, I just came across your page. And I was like, what? This is awesome. So just letting you know that even how minuscule that toggle may seem, it can be really helpful for recruiters to find you. And with that, I'll pass it back to Negin.
Thanks, Neda. So we've talked about how to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is, again, sort of putting your best online foot forward. Excuse me. In terms of what to do with that in the spirit of our subject matter of building, you know, relationships, we acknowledge that that building the LinkedIn profile is just sort of a piece of the puzzle, right? So you may also be using LinkedIn to understand who your connections are to people that you would like to get to know, you know, folks that are in, as you know, not necessarily in your immediate network, but folks that may be sort of second and third relations and that can make introductions, for example, so that you can start to build relationships and have sort of casual conversations with companies or people that you may want to know at those companies. And so what Ned and I thought might be useful to share from our perspective when folks are reaching out to us to get to know us because of they're interested in Netflix as a company or interested in what we're doing at Netflix is to talk about like sort of what can be successful in those types of reach outs and how, you know, we perceive those. So you heard a lot from me sort of at the beginning talking about how I, you know, think about recruitment really not as a very, you know, not necessarily sort of a short-term relationship, but a very long-term one. And I was sincere in that, right? There's people that I talk to and, you know, not just me, obviously, but sort of if you're a recruiter who loves what you do, you sort of understand that you're talking to people all the time that may not be a match for what you are looking for right now, or a match for what that person needs and wants right now. But you're getting to know them, and again, building a relationship for the long term. And I think what's most successful when you make those types of reach outs. So, for example, if you're reaching out to me because there was a common connection, and Negin, I would love to hear more about what Netflix is doing with respect to international growth these days. Would you spend some time with me? What I think is most effective about that type of reach out and that type of conversation is just a real authenticity, right? Is just a real genuine desire to understand more about, the company, a particular role, growth strategy, and a real understanding that, hey, we're building a relationship today, right? And we'll continue to build on that relationship going forward, but that there isn't necessarily an immediate gain for either side, right? There isn't sort of like a, oftentimes there's, again, not going to be a particular match for an open role. And it is, and it's, first of all, not losing heart about that, right? Because you've made a relationship and you have, built a foundation for something going forward. But again, it's helpful when those conversations come from a place, as I've said, of sort of genuinely seeking to understand, genuinely seeking to build a relationship, genuinely, having a curiosity about what's happening, and sometimes just genuinely acknowledging of thank you so much for spending the time, and we've swapped information. I understand that there's not a match right now, but I really hope that you will keep me in mind going forward. And here's my contact information, and let's swap notes and keep in touch, and really view this as a long-term relationship. Again, Ned and I thought that it was important to kind of speak to, again, what we've seen be successful in those types of conversations. And I'll let Neda weigh in just a minute as well. But the other thing that, wanted to sort of, mention about, well, Neda, I don't know, maybe I'll let you weigh in now before I go off in a different direction. And sorry, we have a question as well.
Yes, sure thing. I was, Mitra, I'm looking at your question. I'll let Negin read that while I add a bit more to what Negin was saying. As far as the relationships, there was, so brief story, I had a friend of a friend reach out to me about a role at Netflix. And I reached out to Negin saying, there's someone who's interested in this role. This is their background. I don't know her personally, but it looks like she has good work experience. We connected, and obviously, Negin's been doing this for a good while. And she's like, this is not, her background is fantastic, but it's not exactly what we're looking for. But she said, obviously it would depend on the right role when it comes around, just to have that fit. And so this individual and I have maintained a relationship, and understanding that it might be a long-term relationship if and ever she ends up finding a role at Netflix. And that can be a common story. There's a couple of individuals at the company who I know, one of them applied, it wasn't the right fit. Netflix reached out a year later, and then it worked out. Think when situations like that happen, you truly have to believe it's a blessing in disguise to allow the right opportunity to come and find you and meet you. And as much as, our ego wants this one thing, it's more of an illusion. It can be more of an illusion and this fixed image, rather than allowing the right match to find you, because that really is part of that Netflix culture, is the individual matching the role, but the role also matching the individual. So also encouraging all of you, when you are going out there wanting to find the right roles for you, to really inquire what that role entails and what the team atmosphere is like and what the work atmosphere is like, to really see that it's a fit for you. So you're setting yourself up for success rather than for failure.
I'm sorry. Another thing I was just going to note quickly before I get to the questions is that I think, and I can't overstate this enough, right? And I'm just going to use myself as an example. you could be reaching out to someone like myself to talk about an opportunity at Netflix, and just again being very true to what you're looking for and what you want in the long term, and maybe acknowledging that there isn't a good match right in that moment is not the end of the story either, right? Like I have all sorts of connections at other companies and may have a sense of, hey, you know what, this is not something that we're looking for right at this moment, but I know somebody else who is, right? So I think that what we see sometimes is that someone's enthusiasm for wanting to work at the company, or an enthusiasm for just like, this is my one shot at having a conversation with Negin, and I need to get sort of my foot in the door, is to remember that the more, clear you are about what you want, and the more clear you are with someone that you're speaking to on the inside about what you want, really is going to be better kind of in the long term in terms of helping you land in a great position that's a good match. I will absolutely answer the question, but any questions about sort of what we've mentioned with respect to networking, or with respect to, well, I guess just with respect to networking?
Hi, I have one question.
Sure. Hi, is that Marie?
Yes, it's Marie. Thank you for the talk. It was really nice. So my question is like, I'm a PhD student at in United States, and I'm originally from Iran, so I'm international student here, but I'm a PhD candidate that want to land a job next year. I mean, during the summer or in the fall. So I started the process of job seeking. So I'm searching for the jobs on LinkedIn. But one question that came to my mind was like, if you find a job, it's better to apply on LinkedIn or on their website for it, or is it better to find the recruiters first on the LinkedIn and then connect with them, and after sending the connection request, if they replied us back and if the connection is made, then we will contact them and tell them like, yeah, we are looking for a job, and we found that they are recruiting for that company and they have a position there. And so that's basically my question.
Yeah, sure. First of all, congratulations. I know you're not quite done with your PhD yet, but that sounds pretty amazing. So I would say that we really do try to endeavor to review applications that come into the company. Certainly there are occasions with some very, very high volume jobs where, it's maybe has not been possible, but we really do endeavor to look when folks apply. And I don't see a critical difference between doing that through a job site or through LinkedIn. And I think that probably holds true for other companies as well. In other words, if they're posting on LinkedIn, they're probably serious about seeing the applications come through there as much as they are with respect to the job site. While I certainly, think it's useful to identify or can be useful to identify a recruiter at a company and reach out to them individually, I think that could be an opportunity to sort of individualize the message to somebody. But I would say that I really do try to be to give sort of just as much opportunity to somebody who has applied without identifying a connection than somebody who has. It's not always easy to figure out who the recruiter is at a company, frankly, right? And I wouldn't want to hold that against somebody. And I think that's true for other companies as well. So certainly, people do figure out who I am and send messages to me individually. I'm sure that happens to Neda as well, just as an employee at the company. And we try to follow up on that. But I'd like to believe that applying, either again through Netflix's website, for example, or through LinkedIn will get you to the same place.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Sure. And I promised to circle back, Mitra, to your question. So I think it's sort of a general question. I don't know if there was something more specific that you feel like you're doing or not doing you feel like might have, better results. I don't know if you wanted to give a little bit more context to your question.
Hi. I don't know. For example, I graduated here in educational technology leadership in December 2019. And after that, I've applied for 100, maybe 200 jobs in instructional designer or some administrative jobs. But I've had 2 or 3 interviews, but none of them were successful. Yeah, and I'm looking for maybe something is wrong. I don't know, because I've built my resume, and 2 or 3 recruiters have checked it. Also, my career center in the university, the advisor there checked my resume, and but still it hasn't worked yet.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that, do you have any other recommendation for me?
Sure. Well, look, I would say, depending on how you look at it, it has been successful, right? Because you have been able to obtain some interviews, right? And you have been able to attract some people, with your resume and your skill set, right? And so, it's hard to say something that, may be missing from the equation, without sort of having a look. But I would say that don't be hard on yourself, because it sounds like to some extent there's been some success, and it might just be a matter of, just a lot of these things come to timing, right? A good match between what somebody's looking for and what you bring to the table. I guess I would say, and forgive me if it's, somewhat obvious, but I think that, the connections that you have right now through the PARS Equality Center community, that can be sometimes a more effective way to follow up on leads than exclusively relying on online leads. As I think, many of you know from having been employed, outside of the United States, sometimes just the conversations, right, and the follow-up through those conversations and that network are what can be successful.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course. Yes, Jacqueline, we have many open roles.
There was another question in the chat. I linked that out for us, Negin. There's another question by Mo, but I wanted to add something for Mitra. And obviously my background is, not necessarily in recruiting in any way, but something that kind of comes to mind, especially technically you don't have the US work experience. What kind of comes to mind is applying for global companies. So even if the company is based here in the States, but have a global reach, I imagine these global companies are a bit more interested in individuals who have international experience. I can't imagine that. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it might be worth, adding that into your search criteria.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your global company.
Hi, may I ask a question, please?
Yes, absolutely. Don't let me forget about coming back to Mo, Neda. Thanks for flagging
Absolutely.
that. I missed
I got it.
Hi,
Sarah, please go ahead.
Thank you for the informative session. I have 2 questions, actually. My first question is, how often big industries like Netflix have roles that are not posted online or only posted internally? And my second question is, how significant is the impact of having premium LinkedIn account on attracting recruiters to your profile?
Sure, I'm happy to answer both of those. I would say it's probably very infrequent that we do not post a job. So we post most of our jobs. I would say it would have to be, if we were recruiting for a business line that still remains confidential or something like that, like there would have to be good justification for us, not to try to sort of spread the word that we're looking. So I would say what you see online is a pretty good reflection of what we're actually hiring for. And then with respect to LinkedIn, I would say that we use some of the, some of the more advanced LinkedIn tools sometimes to look for people, but I don't think you particularly need to spend a lot of time, and I should say you should spend time, but not a lot of money, I would say, on having sort of the fancier LinkedIn profile. I would say, this is me speaking personally, this is not like a reflection of Netflix. I would just say that like a good recruiter has a lot of tools and a lot of ways to find people. And again, probably access to different ways to find you without you having to try that hard to stand out on LinkedIn.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So Negin, before we go to Mary's question, Mo's question is related to cover letters and how important it is to add that, personalization to each cover letter for each specific job. Yeah.
This is a little bit, I think, employer specific, to be totally honest. My initial answer is if an employer is asking for a cover letter when they list the job, they're probably serious that they want to see it. And that probably means you should spend some time personalizing your cover letter for them to see it. From a Netflix perspective, it sometimes has some import and sometimes has less. I would say there are occasionally roles that we hire for where we want to really understand somebody's interest in pursuing the opportunity, and we may ask for that type of information. Oftentimes we don't, and I don't penalize somebody for not having a cover letter if we haven't sort of explicitly asked for it. But that, again, may be company specific. And I would say that if somebody has a posting and they've asked for it, that probably means they care to know why you're applying for the job, and you should spend a little time on it, even if it seems like, a bit of a drag. Does that make sense, Mo?
Yes, it does. I actually have a different question too. Sure. I've had quite a good deal of interviews, and I have been able, fortunately, in the past to make it through the second interview. But after that, everything stops. The ball drops and no one continues with me, or no one even reaches back to me to either say we have filled the position or we have moved on with different applicants. How is it possible to go from that second interview to actually securing the job or getting the job?
Yeah. Again, a little bit with respect to my answer to Mitra's question, it's a little bit hard to know without a little bit of the specifics. First of all, I would say that if you have spent the time, if you go to that sort of second round with an employer and things get more serious, my expectation for my team is certainly that someone gets back to you to give you the courtesy of letting you know that you have not received the job. We're not able to do that for everybody who applies or everybody who kind of goes through a first round of interviews. But my expectation is when someone's invested a lot of time and the conversation's more serious, I would expect someone to give me the courtesy of letting me know that I've received the job or not. So I would say it's not inappropriate for you to follow up and try to understand what happened. And I think the other thing, Mo, I would say is, and Mitra, this may be true for you as well, or anyone else with the same question, is, I'm quite receptive if somebody asks me for feedback. If they ask me, hey, it would really, really be helpful for me in my employment journey if you could let me know if there's something that I could have improved on or something I could have done differently. Sometimes the answer just may be, Mo, we think you're great, but there was somebody who had a little bit more experience, right? And it's not going to feel very satisfying, but you have the information. And sometimes you might have somebody share information with you that can be, helpful in terms of something about, your presentation of like the facts around your experience, right? Like maybe that didn't come through, or, it doesn't hurt to ask for feedback. Someone may share it with you and that could be helpful. and again, sometimes the feedback may not feel satisfactory because it's, oftentimes it's just like, you're terrific, but there's somebody else who, just had more experience, but it doesn't hurt to ask.
Well, thank you.
Sure. I apologize, Mary. I do not read Persian. I don't know if Neda, you do.
It would take me probably 20 minutes to be able to read that, but thankfully for Google Translate.
Yes, okay, I'm sure there's others on the phone who can help.
I can do that, Negin. This is Payman.
Great.
Mary, she is asking that she has 20 years of experience as working as a journalist. She has experiences of working with Iranian national television, and she went through BBC training. She also has MA in business administration, and also I believe it's futurism. I don't know the exact English term of that. She is asking someone with this kind of experiences, but all from outside of US, is going to have any chance working with Netflix.
So I think there's a few layers there. We, although we are, a US-based company, have global aspirations, and as I mentioned previously, are committed to bringing stories from really anywhere to everywhere. Right. So I would say at a broad level, absolutely, we are affirmatively looking for people who again, bring diverse experiences and bring diversity in terms of ethnicity, race, experience to the table. So at a broad level, absolutely. I don't, I'm unable to sort of tell with respect to the specific experience, like how that would be a match to what we do at Netflix, but would certainly want to make, make it clear that we are always excited to speak to individuals who bring a unique perspective. So I hope that's helpful.
We'll also note, here as well, especially with Netflix being a global company, as far as job roles, it may be worth, you're obviously based here in the States. I'm not sure if this is somewhere where you want to stay long term, but there are opportunities in our Amsterdam office, London office, where they may be more likely to take someone who is bilingual, can speak multiple languages. I also wanted to ask Negin, because I answered Zahra's question about internships, but I want to make sure I'm answering correctly. The question is related to internships and opportunities. As far as I'm aware, they're not very common at Netflix, but increasingly growing. If you want to add to that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We do accept interns in some pockets of the organization. I would say more typically within the product organization, more technical roles. But elsewhere at the company, it is limited or currently does not exist. I think as Neda mentioned, Netflix may be moving further in that direction, but I would say for the moment, we don't have many. I don't know, Zahra, if there's a particular discipline in which you're interested in. I can try to answer the question more specifically.
Hi. I'm Zahra. I'm computer science master student, and actually I'm looking for an internship for summer. Mm-hmm. Actually, I'm looking for a data science position. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I checked your website and I didn't see any position for an internship.
We do have some internships within data science. They may only be available for PhD students. I can't answer that question with precision right at this moment. I'm happy to kind of research it and circle back with you via Payman if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
Awesome. Negin, it looks like we have 2 more questions coming in. Marie is asking, while sending a connection request to a recruiter on LinkedIn, do we need to attach a note to our connection request introducing ourselves?
I would say yes. Yeah. I think Neda can attest to this as well. Look, we have the great fortune of working at Netflix, which is really, a fantastic company to work at, and I think has a good reputation. So personally, I get a lot of LinkedIn requests from individuals who are interested in the company, and while I certainly try to be, open about accepting them without sort of an explanation of why someone wants to connect with me, I wouldn't know what to do with the connection request, right? So all to say, we get a lot of these, and it's helpful to understand, why somebody's reaching out to make the connection. And Ned, I'd love your perspective on that as well.
Absolutely agree. Especially since you're, it's kind of like a cold call, a cold reach out. It might be helpful making it a little bit more personable and giving some insight into why you want to connect with this particular recruiter and of your interest with this recruiter at Netflix, for example. Hope that answers your question, Marie. Our next question, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Mehnas. I want to take a stab at answer that first part of it and say, go ahead and apply. I feel like oftentimes we may look at a position and second guess ourselves and don't feel like we have the appropriate experience. But I personally feel like it's important to put yourself out there, and it's worth applying. It's worth applying just to kind of establish that relationship. And I imagine the recruiter, especially Netflix recruiters, do reply back, and they will let you know, depending on your experience, and will provide you a little bit more of feedback if the role may not be, right at the moment. As far as the green card policy, I'm not sure. Negin, do you know?
Yeah, if we are able to obtain work authorization, we will usually commit to doing so. So it depends a little bit on an individual situation and our ability to provide work authorization within that particular situation. So, I couldn't speak very specifically the timeline. I apologize. I work with sort of an immigration team who can better answer questions about timelines. But I would say, generally speaking, if we are able to give work authorization and we can make it work, we do have the ability to sponsor that work authorization. But it's a little bit situational, I would say, and the timeline as well.
Thank you. Do you mind if I follow up on that question? I have.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So there are some students like myself on F1 visa who can use OPT for 3 years, and they're currently in the process of getting their green cards through other channels like national interest waiver. When we fill an application, there's that question asking if we would require sponsorship in the future. And most of us are not sure what is the best approach to respond to that question. What do you recommend?
So is it because you don't is it because you don't need immediate help support, but you may in the future? I guess I'm not understanding why it's difficult to answer the question. Is it because it's sort of like it's yes and no?
Yes, it's because it's yes and no. It takes a while for that green card application to be processed when we apply. And we want to make sure that it's not interpreted as a dishonest answer to that question. For example, when I say I don't need a green card or I don't need sponsorship, I don't want to create that assumption in the future that I lied about it.
Right,
so,
right. Yeah, I mean, my advice would just be to give the best answer that you can. I realize it's a yes, no, so sometimes it's hard to kind of give the context. I don't want to give advice that's wrong on that, and I'm going to, fall short of giving advice. I would just say again that usually early in a conversation with a recruiter, somebody would ask you if you need, if you need work authorization. And, at that point, certainly useful to share with somebody that like, I don't technically now, but I may, and they can talk you through what that looks like. I apologize. I know that's not a direct answer to your question. I can try to follow up as well with our immigration team. And so I understand the dilemma and the sort of like, yes, I sort of do, but yes, I sort of don't. And I would probably personally put, yes, I need support because you need to for the long term, but I don't know the best practice.
The reason I'm a little worried here is I figured some of my applications are rejected immediately after I choose that visa sponsorship requirement. And I feel like I don't actually need it. It's just like a 5% chance that I would. So
yeah, I apologize. Like I said, I can try to get better information from our immigration team if that's helpful to pass along, but I don't know how other companies, view that and their position to be able to give work authorization. And frankly, if it does disqualify you, I honestly just couldn't say.
Thank you.
Sorry. I want to be honest about not being able to answer.
Yeah, right. No, that's so true and very real. But I'm not sure if you pronounce it Sarah or Sarah, but I see that you have your next question here, but I just kind of want to tag on to there. And as I mentioned earlier, I feel like it's always a little bit better for us to lean in. So if your need for the visa is really 5%, I feel like if I was in your position and I felt like that's the reason why my applications were getting denied immediately without even someone meeting with you, it might be worth just not checking it and applying, but that is a bit risky because eventually they may say, hey, why didn't you tell us? And you could kind of elaborate and explain why, like as you are with us tonight. But there is, I don't know if that's the best option, but I would just say from my experience, if I was in that position, it might be worth not to stop any opportunities for 5%, chance of needing that visa.
Thank you for both.
Absolutely. I know that you have this next question as well, and I had to Google what UX researcher is. Do you mind giving us a little bit more? I'm pretty sure I understand what the role is, but do you mind giving us a little bit more context of what the role is?
User experience researcher is the kind of researcher who looks at different aspects of a design and user needs and make sure they match, or make evaluations of design to make sure it's going the right direction. It's from the area of human-computer interaction. So it's a combination of psychology and design, sometimes education.
Amazing.
We work with product design or product teams.
Negin,
that's
I feel like
that's another one that I haven't been super close to the technical roles recently. So that's another one that I can give you an easy answer on. I just need to ask a colleague.
That one we can definitely get an answer for you because it is something that I imagine we have here at Netflix. But what Negin was mentioning earlier is, she works like technically the department is talent, but it's just a fancy word for recruiting. So when you're going onto the Netflix job sites, typing in UX researcher, and it's not popping up, it's probably because Netflix is using a different title.
Thank you.
Payman, can I ask you, is there anything, I'm just mindful of time, is there anything that we didn't cover that you had hoped for us to cover, or?
Not anything. I think you guys covered everything so perfectly. Thank you so much.
Not perfectly. I owe you some follow-up. Are there any other questions? I think maybe we have time for one more before we part ways. Okay. Excuse me. Our contact information does appear on the last page of the slides here, which I realize you may not have access to, but I will send along information about internships maybe try to get a more clear answer on the immigration thing and the UX researcher thing through Payman, and make sure that that it gets trickled back to you all. And the last thing I would say is that in the spirit of feedback, which is something that's important to us at Netflix, if there's anything that we could have done better or different, please feel free to, again, to share through Payman and pass along to us. I think we'd appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Negin Jan, Neda Jan. It was an utmost pleasure. Thank you again. I know how busy you guys are. I really appreciate it. And I'm hoping that we all hear good news tonight. Saying that, the next webinar of this series is going to be on November 19th. Is going to be, the topic is Career Conversation for STEM, led by Kamyar Mohajer and Saeed Mirzai. It's going to happen at 6 p.m. on November 19th. Thank you again, Neda Jan. Thank you again, Negin Jan. And thank you all for joining. Have a great night.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.